You ever wonder why your discovery questions generate shallow responses? Now, discovery questions are critical in a sales cycle because they are your window into the buyer. And you want to be able to ask smart questions to be able to find problems that you can solve for. And your ability to really dial in your questions and have them uncover kind of important issues in the buyer's world is going to give you a better chance of being able to truly pinpoint your solutions and make them just must-haves instead of nice-to-haves. And that all starts with your ability to ask questions. Now, the problem in discovery is threefold. So when you think about, all right, well, why aren't my questions landing? Why aren't they great? It's one of three problems, or potentially all three. First one is too narrow. All right. So you ask a question and you say, okay, do you have this problem? Right. And the buyer says, no, I don't have that. That's not an issue. Okay. So as a seller, you're thinking, all right, well, that challenge is off the table. And so let me move on to the next one because you're trying to find pain to be able to sell to it. Now, the problem is what happens if you crafted that question where the buyer was honest, but what it didn't uncover is there's a problem here or here, right? And so by keeping the lens so tight, the challenge or the question so tight, they're answering literally. But if you had just expanded a tiny bit, you would have been able to find some really close related problems that you could solve for. But you just asked it so narrow that you absolutely just remove the ability to get those insights. So that's the first problem, is just making sure that while you want to be specific in your questions, if you are so narrow, you are really limiting the information that they can give you back. The second thing is too lazy. And this might seem harsh, but this is from a buyer perspective. So what happens is you come in and you're like, hey, question. And all of a sudden the buyer gets irritated. Why are they getting irritated? Because all of this is on their website. And it is amazing to me how many times I watch sellers ask questions that 5 minutes of research on their website would have answered every single one of these questions. And so the challenge is when you come in with questions that are out in the public domain, what that's demonstrating is laziness. And buyers hate lazy because their time is valuable. And if they feel like their time is being spent doing your homework for you, that is setting a bad example for the rest of the relationship. And that relationship is probably going to be very, very short. Now, the final part is too random. So in general, buyers don't like to answer a bunch of questions. And what they really don't like is if the questions just feel like a fishing expedition. So if you say, hey, I got this question and this question and this question, and it just feels all over the map, the buyer's going to be like, what are we doing here? What are you talking about? What are these questions related to? And so it starts to create irritation. And then the time shrinks, right? Because they were like, I'm not going to give you just an endless fishing expedition. Like you get one more and that's it. And so if the questions feel like you're just randomly throwing stuff out, just hoping to find pain, the buyer's not going to tolerate that. And so the key in all these is, one, you want to be careful in the construction of your question to be specific, but just wide enough to get it. You want to make sure that you are doing your homework, finding this stuff, and then starting to think about what are questions that are not in the public domain and that only live in the buyer's mind. And from a random perspective, maybe this isn't random. It's just from the buyer perspective, it feels random. So a lot of times, if you can create some kind of anchor that says, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions related to X. And now all of a sudden, there becomes this hub for these questions. So they don't feel random because you've kind of defined, here is the scope that we're doing this discovery in. And now all of a sudden the buyer is willing to give you more rope and more kind of leeway. So there's just small changes that you can make that all of a sudden will make your questions smarter and resonate more with your buyer. And ultimately, what that's going to mean is you get better information and your job's a whole lot easier to sell.